There was a wealthy man, well advanced in years, who fell ill. He called his trusted advisors to his bedside. One was his doctor, one was his pastor, and one was his lawyer. He explained, "They say you can't take it with you when you're gone, but maybe they're wrong. And I'd like to think that if I arrive on the other side, if I have a little cash with me, maybe it'll serve me well. So what I'd like to do is give you each an envelope with $100,000 in cash in each envelope. And when the time comes and I'm laid to rest, I'd ask that when you come to my service, you slip that into my coffin so that I'll have it with me on the other side." Well, it wasn't very long, and the man did die, and the three advisors came to his service, and everybody saw that they had slipped something into his coffin during the calling hours. When the service was over, as they were departing together, the doctor said, "I have a confession to make. You know, funding levels are really kind of low, and we needed a CAT scan at the hospital. We were $20,000 short, so I took $20,000 from my envelope and put the balance into the coffin." The pastor said, "Well, I suppose I have a confession to make as well. We're pretty strapped at the church, and, you know, we needed a new roof, so I took $50,000 out of my envelope, put the balance in the coffin." The lawyer leveled a look at them and just said, "I am so disappointed in you that you would treat so casually the sacred trust we had to our friend. I want you to know I put in his coffin my personal check for the full $100,000. Confession is good for the soul. There may be hope for the soul of the pastor and the doctor, not too sure about the attorney in our story. There's a saying, to err is human. If we're human beings, we're all going to err from time to time. But thank goodness the other side of that equation is to err is human, to forgive is divine. All forgiveness really proceeds from the Father through his chosen instruments, but we can count on God to forgive us when we confess our sins to him. It may not neutralize the consequences of what we have done. You can't turn back the clock and change things, but we can find forgiveness and a brand new start and the redeeming love of God who can redeem even life's difficult consequences. Our text for today demonstrates this. It is a story about King David. He was a righteous man, we're going to find, even though he was a human being and a flawed human being who was capable of making mistakes. Nevertheless, he was the king who set the standard by which all the other kings of Judah and Israel came to be judged and measured. He wrote a large part of the book of Psalms. In fact, our call to worship today was attributed to his authorship as an example. So we're going to take a moment to look at his circumstances and what we might learn as flawed human beings from them. We're going to press the rewind button and go back to the middle of his life, the story that occurred early in his reign. One hot summer night, King David went up on the roof of his palace to get a breath of fresh air. And while he was up there looking out over the capital city of Jerusalem, he spied a beautiful woman taking a bath. He was completely captivated by the sight, couldn't take his eyes off of her, was obsessed with her, had to know everything about her. Sent his advisors to find out things about her. They came back. Her name, and I kid you not, was Bathsheba. Bathsheba was married, though, unfortunately, to a soldier in the king's army by the name of Uriah, a very devoted soldier. But David was so covetous of his wife, he devised a plan. He told his military commanders, "Send Uriah and his company to the battlefront where the fighting is the fiercest. And then I want you to withdraw his company, leaving him exposed." Well, you can guess what happened. Uriah was killed by enemy fire. But that rendered Bathsheba a war widow and available. So King David marries her. Not long afterwards, she becomes pregnant, and she bears a son. David seemed to have gotten away with murder. But you know, even things that aren't seen by other people are always seen by God. He sees all. And he sends his prophet Nathan to confront David about his sin. The Lord sent Nathan to David. When he came to him, he said, "There were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him." Isn't that sweet, little baby pet lamb? Kind of reminds me of Nancy and her chickens. They all have names, and we can eat their eggs, but I could never butcher one of them, I can tell you that. That would be a no-no. Our story continues. Now a traveler comes to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. Now, isn't that cold? Isn't that cold? David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must pay for the lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and had no pity." And Nathan says to David, "You are the man. You are the man who has done this. The Lord who sees all saw what you did when you had Uriah killed. You killed him. Might have been the swords of the Amorites, but it was by your hand that he died." So David is busted. And he's even more exposed than Bathsheba was when she was up on the roof that day. What to do? Well, he can lie his way out of the situation. He could blame the military commanders for some military mistake, which reminds me of something Hubert Humphrey once said. He said, "To err is human, to blame it on others is politics." David could have put his damage control people to work, his spin meisters to put a favorable spin on things. He might have even thrown Bathsheba under the bus and disparaged her character. What was she doing naked on the roof in the first place? But David doesn't do any of that. His response is immediate, it's simple, it's direct. Then David said to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." Boy, you don't hear that too often by a head of state, do you? But David was no ordinary head of state. As Vittorio Alfieri once put it, "To err is human, but contrition felt for the crime distinguishes the virtuous from the wicked." David may have been a human being like the rest of us. He may have been flawed. He may have had his failings, but he was able to admit when he made a mistake. He was able to, as our title puts it, fess up, to make his confession. That made him a virtuous human being, because he could admit he made a mistake. Now, this didn't save him from the terrible consequences for his sin. The little baby boy born to him in Bathsheba died, fell ill and died. His other sons ended up causing him no small measure of grief throughout the rest of his days, but David knew he had it coming. He took it like a man, but thus humbled, and having confessed his sins, he found forgiveness, and God redeemed even his difficulties so that he became that great king by which all the other kings were measured. Everybody loves a redemption story, and David's story is certainly that, because he was able to fess up when he made a mistake. When I was a kid, I made a mistake once. Oh, I messed up all the time, but one time I messed up pretty bad. My dad confronted me about it. My dad was a man of few words. You've got to, isn't that the funniest thing when you think about a kid like me who can't stop talking, born to a guy that Amish Mennonite stock, very reserved, and man of very few words. And while I'm talking and saying nothing, you can be sure when he said something, he had something to say. And he confronts me about something I did that was very bad. And frankly, I'm not being evasive. I don't remember what it was. I just remember it was bad. And when he confronted me about it, I knew I had disappointed him. And I never wanted to disappoint my dad. I respected him more than anybody. But I didn't even try to cover it up. I admitted to him that I had done whatever I'd done, and I said I was sorry, and I hung my head, and I waited for those words that would hurt much more than any corporal punishment. And here's what my dad said. It takes a big man to admit he made a mistake. My dad could say more in 10 words than I could say in 10 years. That's the kind of dad I had. And I wanted to tell you about that. While I had a chance, next week is Father's Day, and Brother Ryan Gear, a gifted pastor, is going to bring the message. And so this is my chance to give a shout out to my dad. I don't mention him too often, you may have noticed, because I tend to get a little emotional about my dad. I have never forgotten his words, and I've continued to make my share of mistakes. I don't always get caught when I do. But I'll tell you, and that takes the pressure off to confess anything. But there are times I've been caught, and then you have a choice: are you gonna blame somebody else? Are you gonna get political, or are you gonna try to evade that truth? Or when I thought about my dad, I thought I want to be as big a man as he thought that I should be. And one thing I've discovered is that not everybody can take an apology. Most people can. Some people can't. But that's really not our problem. That's their problem. The ball's in their court. Once we confess to having done something wrong, we've done what we can, and the ball's in somebody else's court. If they want to forgive, they can forgive. If they don't, that's their issue. We should want to please our Father in heaven, to be the person He calls us to be, that is big enough to admit that we've made a mistake when we have. That was certainly David's experience. He found redeeming love, and that can be our experience as well. The next time you make a mistake, and you certainly will make mistakes if you're human beings, next time you make a mistake, I hope that you will see it as a spiritual opportunity. A spiritual opportunity to fess up, but also a spiritual opportunity to discover the redeeming love of God. And what a friend we have in the Almighty, all of our sins and griefs to bear. What a friend we have in Jesus. Please rise.